Well, welcome to another Relate Well with Dr. Rick Marks. It is good to have you, whether it be live right now, because this is a Relate Well live with Dr. Rick, or even if you're watching this by a recording. I want to thank you for the time that you're taking to hear us out, hear some of our thoughts and visions for healthy marriage, healthy love, what that looks like. All right. And what the possibilities can be for your marriage and for you as an individual. You know, I grew up in a broken home. If you've watched some of my videos before, I've been tracking some of our Relate Well lives. You've kind of heard my story. For those that are new, I want to welcome you to Relate Well Live with Dr. Rick. You know, I grew up in a broken home, and in that brokenness, there were a lot of deep insecurities in my life. A lot of ways in which I didn't love myself. I was deeply insecure. I picked up a lot of messages in my life from my dad and my stepmom that I'm not good enough, that I don't matter, that I was unlovable, that had no real value. And I went into my adult life really believing those lies. It wasn't until I left home and joined the Navy that I began to have to really question a lot of what I was taught. Not just verbally, a lot of this is actually taught non-verbally. I always tell people it's not what you say or do that matters. A lot of times it's what you don't say and don't do that screams really loud. And so I went into my adult world really with a lot of brokenness and a lot of woundedness, a deeply wounded heart, and I had a lot of healing to do. And so what we're here to do today is talk about the idea of the 4 keys, all right, that will help you become the loving person you want to be. But more importantly, to let you know that all of us, all humans, were actually created for love. Now, yes, I did use the word created. Just so you know, my background's a psychologist and a marriage family therapist, but I'm also a man of faith. I'm also an ordained minister from the Christian faith. My background religiously, my father's side of the family is Jewish. My mother's side historically were Muslims. I was baptized Catholic. I was raised Unitarian in the Atlanta Unity Church, and then came to faith in Christ through a small Baptist church in Georgia, and left for the Navy. Was a chaplain's assistant in the Navy. So I believe in faith. I believe in spirituality. All right. I don't hide my faith. I'm just not one that pushes it on people. Okay. But I do believe that we were created either way, whether you believe we were created or whether you think that humans evolved. What matters most is not how you think we got here. In my mind, for this talk, what matters is either way, no matter how we got here, the brain is still doing what it's doing. And we want to talk about the part of our brain. Did you know that your brain is actually wired for connection? That your brain is wired to bond emotionally? That we are actually wired for love, to be objects of love, and also to give love. We are created for love. You know, for those in the faith community, think about Jeremiah 31:3. I got a verse here for you. I have loved you with an everlasting love, therefore I have drawn you. He's drawn us with loving kindness. Sadly, in some aspects of the church today, they're not drawn to faith through love. They're drawn to the faith through fear, punishment, rejection, and abandonment. In Genesis 1:27, God created man in his own image. And see, God himself is love. And so we were created in love for love. All right. God is love, and the one who abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. We love. Why? Because he first loved us. We were created for love. And there is somehow a teaching in the faith community that says that basically you need to get to a place in your life where all you need is God. Well, folks, that's actually untrue. If it was true, then why wasn't it true for Adam? Because before the fall and before Eve, all he had was God. And God said it was not good that man should be alone. Folks, you can be married and very much alone. That aloneness really has nothing to do with marriage. That aloneness has to do with the fact that all humans were designed. The brain is a social organism. The brain must emotionally attach to others. In the family, that's why the family is the central unit for love. Sadly, today, most families aren't loving. Most families, the kids don't feel they have value. They don't believe that they matter. They don't feel that they're good enough. I've said it before in other talks. I'm going to say it again here. Every human early in life must have 4 questions answered. By the way, these are not the 4 keys. We'll get to those in a minute. They must have 4 questions answered. Do I matter? Do I matter? Do I have value? Am I loved? Am I lovable? And do I have a purpose? And all of that is based on the way a person is treated by their parents at the emotional level. I remember once I was doing a marriage retreat somewhere many years ago. And during a part of the retreat, I was talking about how we bond and how we attach and the 10 core relational needs that are hardwired into the limbic system of the brain, which is the emotional part of the brain. And a gentleman in there was kind of getting frustrated, and he actually kind of spoke up in a room about 100. He said, "Are you suggesting I don't love my children?" We were talking about the core relational needs. And I said, "Excuse me, sir?" He goes, "Are you suggesting I don't love my children?" And he said this. He goes, "Let me tell you something. No one will ever suggest I didn't love my kids. My children had food on the table, clothes on their back, a roof over their head. I love my children. And I live by 4 words: goodwill, respect, humility, and empathy. It is the core of the Relate Well program. It is the fundamental way in which you will learn to have a fight-free marriage." So I said to him, "May I share my thoughts about what you just said out of respect?" He said, "Sure." And I said, "What I'm about to say, sir, I mean respectfully. With all due respect, sir, Medicare and Medicaid does that for millions of people every single day, particularly children. Anybody can do what you just said. That requires money. I can do that." I said, "The difference between a father and a daddy is a daddy gives his heart away. That is what matters." See, my dad did food, air, and water, shelter, but he didn't know how to give his heart away because he didn't own his own heart. He was still a broken man, emotionally an adolescent. My stepmother was the same way. And they couldn't give their heart away because they themselves were broken and wounded, and they didn't have the ability to give their heart away. You see, we were created for intimacy. We were created for connection. You were created for love and to be loved. And you were created to give love. Did you get that? You were created to be loved, but you were also created to give love. Now, it's hard to give love if you don't believe you have enough value or worth to be loved. Rick Marks, early days of my marriage and my adult life. See, I didn't know how to love well because I didn't believe I was lovable. The message I always got: you weren't good enough. You don't matter. You have no value, that you're not lovable. And so I internalized every bit of that into my life. Is it any wonder I was so smothering to my wife early on in the marriage? Why? I was a broken, wounded kid. Though I was in an adult male body, emotionally, I wasn't. So we want to talk about mankind was created to bond, to attach emotionally to other people. All humans must bond, not to just oneself or God, but to others. And there are 4 keys. Now we're going to get into the 4 keys. There are 4 keys that will help you open up your heart to intimacy. That 4 keys that will help you open your heart up to attachment. 4 keys that will allow you to open your heart to love so that you can be loved and that you can give love. So let's take the first key. You ready? Key number 1. Number 1, the image that you have of yourself, will determine the depth of the intimacy in which you will dwell. Did you get that? The image that you have, the beliefs that you have, the perspective that you have of who you are as a person and how you are as a person will actually determine the level of bonding, attachment, intimacy, or connection in which you can exist and live in. You see, If you believe that you are unloving, if you believe that you have no value, if you believe that you're not good enough, if you believe that you don't matter, if you believe that you're not lovable, if you believe that you're broken and unfixable, if you believe that you are ugly, you understand that those belief systems, however you pick those up, because you had to tell yourself those things as a kid based on what happened to you and around you, but the image that you have of you, if your image of yourself is so low, you can't dwell in a deep level of intimacy. Why? Because the negative belief systems that you have about you will block you. They'll block you. And by the way, it's not just the perspectives that you have about yourself. It's also the things that you've been taught that will block you from loving well. Example, my wife grew up in a very legalistic megachurch in Jacksonville, Florida. I wasn't raised in that, but they had taught over the years that a particular type of man is, quote, whatever godly means. I don't really know, but we're going to use the word godly here. In other words, she held me to a standard based on what these people taught you have to look like. In other words, you have to wear a suit. You've got to be there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Tuesday night, and Wednesday night. You have to read your Bible every day. You have to say prayers every day. You have to lead your family in a Bible study every day. And you have to be able to do, get it? A, B, C, D, E. I didn't grow up with that. Never was that. And she judged me based on that standard because she had a belief that this is what a person has to look like. So she strived to be that person. The problem is, it's a lie. It's a lie. It's just some person or some group's a view of what something is supposed to be. But it allows no room for someone to be the end result in a different way. And so she began to judge me and measure me by those things. It inhibited her ability to be intimate and close to me as I am. Why? Because her mind, I didn't fit. I wasn't the picture. Same thing. I grew up believing that I wasn't good enough, that I was unlovable, that I didn't matter. And I love Luella, but because unconsciously in what's called the hippocampus of the brain, I had these belief systems that were not based in reality. They're actually lies, but you don't know they're lies. So they unconsciously, they frame they're the prism by which you see your future. They're the prism by which you live out your future. Moment by moment by moment, as you walk into the future, you live your life out. Well, you don't know is you keep throwing that I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable, I'm terrible, I'm broken and unfixable. You keep throwing the belief system into the future, so you keep living out the very stories that you created for yourself way back there in life. And so when Luella would try and do something loving, I didn't accept it. Why? Because my brain says I'm not lovable. And so where a lot of her own stories and what she believed about what something's supposed to be, my own internal view of myself inhibited me from developing the depth of the intimacy I really wanted to dwell in. I just didn't know that I didn't know that. Because see, the image you have of yourself will determine the depth of the level of intimacy that you can experience in your marriage. What do you believe of yourself? What is your perspective of you? Is it any wonder why we need to have healthy self-image and self-esteem and self-confidence and self-worth? If you want to live as well, love yourself. If you want to love your spouse, particularly you husbands, love yourself. Because you can't love your spouse well, guys. You can't love your wife well if you don't love yourself. You can't love others well if you don't love you. You see, once you come to a place of healthy self-love, then you become a secure person. You're secure in your identity. You learn that it's okay to not be okay. You see, I say it this way. Most people aren't okay with not being okay. And because they're not okay with not being okay, then they try and live their life as if they are okay, but they really believe they're not okay. And here's how I like to say it. When you get to a place in your life where you're okay with not being okay, you'll be okay. And that was a place I had to get. I had to be able to change my internal beliefs about myself, my perception of myself. I had to question the things that I was told as a kid that I never thought to question. I just adopted them as the way they are, who I am, only to find out that I am good enough, I am lovable, that I do have value. Second key, you must become aware that you actually do need intimacy. You do need connection. You do need bonding. You do need attachment. You do need love. We must become aware. Key 2, you must become aware of your need for connection. You see, a lot of times when we've been damaged and hurt in experiences, particularly in childhood, we don't believe that we're good enough to be loved. We don't believe we're worthy of love. We don't believe that we're deserving of love. Now, you couple that with hyper-individualism, which is a hallmark of the Western culture. You don't need anybody else. Pick yourself up by your own bootstrap. Do it yourself. Suck it up. Get over it. In the faith community, it gets translated this way. Trust Jesus. Just pray about it. What's the message? You shouldn't need connection. You shouldn't need anybody else. You just learn to do this on your own. The problem with that is, what do you do with the 59 one another verses? Love one another, encourage one another, support one another, comfort one another, mourn with those that mourn. All of that is about attachment. All of that is about the fact that we are created for intimacy. You must become aware of your need for intimacy. You know, the problem is a lot of people are self-reliant. And that self-reliant posture robs you of the ability to bond and connect in healthy ways. This was my wife. She never believed that she needed comfort or she needed attention or she needed acceptance or approval. Those 10 core relational needs that are hardwired into the limbic brain. We talk about those in the Relate Well curriculum, and we actually have an assessment by Dr. David Ferguson that actually identifies your top 3 of those needs so you can be aware of which needs, when met, produce the greatest feelings of love for you. But if you're self-reliant, you deny this part of your humanity. You deny the fact that you do need connection. You deny the fact that you do need intimacy. You deny the fact that you need love. And sadly, a lot in the church and as well as in culture today, Western culture in particular, we have this hyper-individualism. And the problem with hyper-individualism is it actually increases immaturity. But it also sends a message, you shouldn't need anything. You should learn to do it on your own. It is not good that you should be alone. Why? Because we are all created with the need for connection. We are created with the need for intimacy. And you must give yourself permission to recognize the fact that you need intimacy, the fact that you need connection, the fact that you need love is not a sign of weakness. It isn't. It's not a sign of weakness to admit that you need appreciation and approval and acceptance and that you need affection and you need those kinds of things. To admit that I need those things is actually a confession. It's a confession. A confession of what? It's a confession that you're human. It's a confession that you're human. And it's a lot easier to learn to be human, got it, folks, than it is to try to be something you can never be. Distant, disconnected, i.e. perfect. Let me turn this phone off here. Someone's calling through. It's easier to allow yourself to recognize that it's important to be human. And guess what? To be human means you need intimacy. It means you need love. It means you need these things. And I submit to you that the second key to opening up your heart for a deep, intimate, loving marriage is you must become aware of your need for it. Not want, but need. All right? Now, we must be willing to embrace our responsibility for intimacy. That's key number 3. You must be willing to embrace your responsibility for intimacy. In other words, I need it, but guess what? I have a responsibility to give it. I have a responsibility to give it as well. In other words, I must be willing to embrace the fact that I have to give it to Luella. I got to give it to my kids. Why? Well, if I need it and I'm human, then they need it and they're human. Thus, I must learn to love well. Why? Because I have a responsibility to give intimacy, to give connection, to give love. Because all of us are longing for it. But if we have a longing for it, and we do, then it must be given to us. So not only do I need to be able to recognize I have a need for it, I must also recognize I have a responsibility to give it away. To give it away. And that's key number 3. What are the things that will keep you from giving it away? Well, belief that you don't need it. The belief that other people should just suck it up and get over it. A belief that that pride will get in the way of you serving because you're angry or resentful or fearful that you might get rejected, you might get abandoned. In other words, to give intimacy is a risk, isn't it? You may not get it back. All of these things will block you. If you will allow me to pause here for a minute. I need to go turn this light on. For some reason, it turned off. So hang on just a second. All right, got my light back here. Forgive me for that. That's what you get when you're here in your studio in the Relate Well Center here in Jacksonville, Florida. And somehow the light went off there, and I had to go move the switch. All right. So the third key is an understanding that you have to be willing to embrace your responsibility for intimacy. I have a responsibility to make sure my wife's love needs are met. We call them caress and relate well. All right, the cares needs, and those are the 10 needs. That when those needs are met, she feels love because she needs love. But I have a responsibility to meet them. I have a responsibility to meet them in my children. I have a responsibility to meet them in your life. You see, since everyone has the need for connection and bonding, then I must also recognize that you can't bond and attach if people don't want to give that to you. If they don't want to bond and attach to you. You know, when people want to connect to me, when people want to send me the message that I'm good enough, that I feel loved. I feel, you actually get dopamine. I get this dopamine shot. And I feel valued. I feel like I matter. And just as much as I need that, which means you have a responsibility to give it to me, I also have a responsibility to give it to you. So you can feel loved. So you can feel valued. So that you can know you're good enough and that you matter and that you are lovable. And the fourth key is intimacy, connection, bonding, attachment, love, intimacy requires that you find your value and self-worth in your spirituality. Now, I admit that here for me, it would be God. But folks, all humans have a spiritual side. That means that you don't live just for yourself, that we are connected to each other, even in a spiritual sense. Spirituality has to do with that transcendent part of us, that you are not just you, but you are a part of something bigger and greater. You got to be a part of community. The 12 steps is a spiritual program. The 12 steps force you to live outside of yourself and connect to God as you understand him. Now, in my world, that God would be Jesus Christ, but I recognize other people will find it in different ways, all right? But it's about spirituality because all humans have a spiritual side. And that we have to find our value and worth, not just in ourselves, but also through our spirituality, through relationship with God. Now, for me, personally, coming from the Christian faith, and I understand the Christian faith is if the Father sent the biological Son to die on the cross for me, that in itself tells me that I am good enough. Because you don't die for things you hate. You die for things you value. You die for things that matter to you. You die for things that you cherish. So I get to link my faith and value there. For some, your value and worth may be in the group that you're a part of. You see, maybe it's your 12-step group. Maybe it's your community you're a part of. And that community gives you a sense of value, spirituality. We all have to come to realize that we need to find our value and worth, not just in ourselves, but outside of ourselves. Spirituality, faith, religion. And when you do come to get your value and worth, not just within yourself, but through spirituality, through faith, through a relationship with God, you begin to realize that you are here not just for yourself. You are here to love others as well. And that's a powerful way of living life when you begin to realize, you know what? This isn't just about me. It's about me loving others. And here's what I've learned. When I learn to love and respect myself in a healthy, mature way, I can love others in a healthy, mature way. It's about the power of attachment. Listen to this quote by Steve Stosny. Steve had been on Oprah quite a few times. He's a friend. Steve is one who talks about compassion. He's a clinical psychologist out of the University of Maryland. Listen to this quote. In attachment relationships, we form bonds with significant others, including children, parents, lovers, and sometimes siblings and good friends. These deep emotional bonds give enormous power to participants of attachment relationships. You feel powerful in these relationships. He goes on to say, this builds your sense of self. He's absolutely right. When you know that you are loved, when you open yourself up to be loved, then you feel valuable within yourself, and that motivates you to go give love so others feel valued. It builds your sense of self. We learn how important, valuable, loving, and worthy of love we are only by interacting with those that we love. It's those deep, bonded, connected relationships that give us a sense that we have meaning, that we have purpose. And this is supposed to be in the family. Sadly today, most parents are so broken and wounded, they're actually sending the opposite message to their kids. You're a burden. Why aren't you good enough? You don't measure up. You're not good enough. Or you have to be this kind of a person or as a Christian or whatever it is for you to get love and acceptance. And a lot of these kids are walking away from their homes angry and hurt, deeply wounded, because the message they were sent was, you're not really good enough until you fit the box that I have for you. That was my home growing up. And sadly, it was also the early years of my marriage. You see, when you learn to love God and others, you will build your sense of self. This is the essential part of loving well. The essential part of loving well is that you're able to love well. Why? Because you learn to love yourself. You've learned to love yourself. Listen to this. The crucial elements of self-building in attachment relationships are these three. You need to have an unconditional safety and security. I feel safe with you. I feel secure with you. Not just that you're not going to hit me. All right? We're going to throw something at me. That's physical safety. This is emotional safety, that I feel valued, that I can be myself. I can be vulnerable with you. I can be emotionally open to you. You won't judge me. You won't criticize me. You won't tear me down. You won't beat me up. You won't judge me. Without having that level of openness and vulnerability, what you're going to learn is I can't be myself. I have to be something else. You see, children grow up being very open and vulnerable. Think about things that your kids may have said to you when they're little. Well, Daddy, you're fat. They're just being what they are. Sadly, kids learn that they can't be honest and they can't be open. They have to hide who they are. They have to shun parts of themselves because they're not going to be measured. They weren't measuring up. They're not fitting the paradigm, whatever that might be. You've got to have unconditional safety and security. There must be high levels of compassion for you to have a healthy sense of self. Did you get that? For you to have a healthy sense of self, you need people to have compassion for you, to have empathy for you. It sends a message that I care about how you think. I care about how you feel. I care about what happened to you. Compassion means to suffer with. It means to come alongside and bear a burden. Why? Why would you mourn with someone? Because you have compassion. Why would you rejoice with them? Is you have compassion for them. And lastly, the third element we need in self-building is freedom from resentment, hostility, abuse, and other emotional constraints that don't allow you to be human. Now, we can learn to speak our truth in a loving way. You can learn to emotionally regulate. I met with a friend today, and he's struggling, particularly in his marriage. And he holds the anger in. I said to him, it's all right to be angry. Give yourself permission to be angry. It's okay. What's happening is wrong. It's okay. But as long as you stuff the anger, you become more resentful and bitter. You harm yourself and you harm the relationship. Just talk about what's going on inside of you with goodwill and respect. But if you hold it in, it turns resentment long term. Don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to yourself. Now, compassion is an essential part of love. Compassion is essential for healthy relationships. Compassion is essential for healthy attachments. Compassion is essential for you to be a healthy person. Now, what are some essential components of love as it relates to compassion? Listen to this. Number one, love without compassion. Love without compassion is controlling. It's possessive. It can become jealous. And in some cases can become very destructive. When love lacks empathy, when love lacks compassion, you've got a very different animal on board in terms of the relationship. Number two essential component of compassion, as love, is compassion becomes sympathetic of another person's core hurts. It becomes sympathetic of their core feelings of rejection and abandonment, that they're not good, that they feel unloved or unlovable. Compassion says, wow, I never knew you felt that way. You see, rather than once you suck it up and get over it, well, that's not true, which only sends a message you don't care. It is true for them. It is their perspective, however right or wrong it might be. We need to have compassion for people's core hurts, their core pains. Compassion is caring about others, as it also makes me feel loving or worthy. Have you ever had compassion for someone, they were hurting, and you were able to come alongside and bear that with them and support them and encourage them and love them and serve them in their pain? Have you noticed it made you feel good about you? Have you noticed that whenever you're able to do that, there's a part of you that goes, yeah, I like being this kind of person. Nothing prideful about that. It was the way we're designed. It's the very way that we're designed to be. You see, caring for others makes me feel loving and worthy. Number four, compassion is motivation to do the right thing. Now, this is very important. There's this idea and culture that you to have empathy and compassion for someone. That means you allow them to be what they are, that you accept how they are. Look, I can have compassion that you believe you're a chimpanzee, but if I don't challenge that thinking, I'm actually harming you. There is still a truth out here. Beyond your truth, there is the truth. And I can have compassion that you feel stupid and dumb. Can have compassion that you feel a certain way. But compassion doesn't mean that you stay there. It does the right thing. Compassion sometimes says no. Compassion says I care, but I actually disagree. It's very caring to stand up for what is true, you see. I can speak my truth, just do it in a loving way. Compassion. But the truth needs to stand for itself. And lastly, compassion is not the same as forgiveness or condoning someone's offenses. I can have compassion, but forgiveness is a choice. I can have compassion for you and what happened, but that doesn't mean I've forgiven you. Now, compassion, I think, is essential to lead to forgiveness, but that doesn't mean I'm going to forgive. That's a choice piece. You see, and what happens is people get stuck in their core hurts. And when you're stuck in your core hurts, you feel disregarded or unimportant, you feel accused, you feel guilty, you feel devalued, you feel rejected, you feel powerless, you feel inadequate, you feel unlovable, you feel you don't matter. When you get stuck in your core hurts, then you're robbed of loving yourself and you're robbed of loving others. But what's mostly important is you're robbed of giving love and you're robbed of being loved. It's that simple. You see, when it comes to our core hurts, what happens is we all wear a mask. I wear the mask of what I want you to see me to be, right? I let you see me a certain way. That's the mask. We call, this is kind of Stasny's work on the 3 levels of the emotional self. There's that top level. It's what the world sees. On the good side, it includes interest, enjoyment, compassion, love, goodness, and self-control. On the bad side, it includes blame, anger, anxiety, obsessions, depression, addictions, and manipulation. This is the mask. This is the core, the self, not the core self, but this is the self that I wear to the public. But just underneath that top level self is my core hurts. And really, you can take all core hurts and divide them under 2 categories: inadequacy and unlovable. Now, men tend to feel inadequate. Women tend to feel unlovable. 2 sides of the same coin. There's really only 2 core hurts: inadequate, unlovable. But here's what happens. As you start bumping up to that core hurt, you start to feel the shame around being inadequate, the shame of not being lovable, and you start to fear. You start to fear being a certain way. You start to fear being that way. What happens is then you don't want to feel the pain of that, so you start to move away from it. You go medicated with alcohol or drugs or pornography, or you go yell or scream. Wow, I don't want to feel that. But here, consider the possibility that what if you push through the core hurt to your core value? Yes, to your core value. You see, all of us as humans inherently have dignity. We have worth because we exist. We matter. We matter. You matter. I matter. We have a core value. That core value, from my faith background, it's who I am in Christ. But it could also be who you are as a person, who's a parent, who's a child of that person, or because this group has said that you matter, you have value. What if you went to your core value? And when you touch your core value, you can start to undo the core hurt. The problem is the core hurt, we don't want to feel that, so we move away from it and continue living in the mask, our addictions, or whatever it is you do. But if you were to push through to your core value, you'd actually find that you actually have dignity. You have worth. Why? If anything, just because you exist. And then I bet I could find a bunch of people who know you, who believe you have value and worth too. What if you started to live out of your core value? You will build your sense of self. You will access yourself much quicker when you go to your core value. And then you find out, wow, I am lovable. And guess what? I want to love others well. Because in that core value, you will. The 4 keys to opening your heart up to intimacy so you can love well. Now, let's say you're both doing this. You're both loving well because you love yourself well and you learn to love each other well. You have the skills and the tools for goodwill and respect, humility and empathy. What we call those the 4 protectors of an us and relate well. Can you see that you would actually have a fight-free marriage? You'd have a fight-free marriage. Yeah, it may take you time to develop that way of being, but you can move to that place in time so that you habitually live there. It's just a way of being for you. You've transformed your life to live out that core self of your value and your worth. For me, it's linked to my faith in Christ. So I settled that question once for all there. And besides, my wife says I have value. My kids have a value. I've got friends that say I do. Well, if they say I do, in addition to Christ, well, then I must. I can either agree or disagree, but it's still true of me. Why? Others have declared it to be true of me. There's nothing wrong with just agreeing with them and living out of that, because you declare on others. You declare that same message to others, and they need to embrace the truth of it as well. Can you see that you may have conflict in relationships, but you won't fight? You'll solve it well. You'll solve it well. You'll work through those things where you're not fighting. That though you have conflict, and conflict's a part of life, it's just a part of any relationship. What you will find is, though, in the midst of it, conflict, you're solving problems, protecting each other's value and worth, protecting what we call the usness in the marriage, and you'll solve the problem so that the relationship wins and you both are more connected because we solve this problem rather than letting the problem divide who we are. Thanks for listening. It's Dr. Rick Marks and another Relate Well Live with Dr. Rick. I hope in some small ways it might have encouraged you. I hope in some way you might have gotten something out of this that it gives you understanding or realizations or awarenesses for yourself. Maybe a place to transform. Maybe you can give yourself permission to accept that maybe you do have value and worth, and you do. You do. But ultimately, it's going to be your choice just as much as it was mine. Have a great day, everyone.